Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this rather chilly Thursday morning in Cape Town. My name's Michaela Thomas, and I'm from the marketing department here at Milpark Business School. I want to welcome you here today to Crowdcast, and of course, I want to welcome Dr. Kobus Oosthuizen and Athol Williams to our fantastic platform. We are going to get more into detail with Athol in just a moment, but for now, I just want to take you through some house rules and let you know where to find things on the platform. So guys, as I've said, good morning. On the right-hand side, we have our chat box. So if you want to say hello, if you want to tell us how your day is going, just say hello there. We'd love to hear from you. If you want to ask Athol or Kobus a question, at the bottom of your screen, there is an Ask a Question facility. We already have a question from someone, and we'll go through that a little bit later on. But if you want to find out more or ask anything more of our lovely speaker today, please ask a question there. We will be running a few polls during the session, but for now, there is one just to test you, see if you're awake in the poll section. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Kobus Oosthuizen, the Dean of the Business School, to take us through the introductions. Over to you, Kobus.
Thank you, Michaela. Good morning, Sawubona, Molweni, Dumela, Goeiemorgen, Macheloni Avudi, Lotiani, Tobela, Abutreni. Welcome to Milpark Business School's next episode in our Tomorrow's Beautiful webinar series. And today, our special guest is Athol Williams with a talk on whistleblowing and treatment of whistleblowers and ethical review. So prepare to be amazed, folks. Now, Athol is a fascinating individual. He testified before the State Capture Commission in March 2021 as a whistleblower to state capture activities by leading public and corporate actors. He spent over 20 years in business in the US, the UK, and South Africa. And Athol advocates for more ethical leadership in business and government and writes extensively on this topic. He's held academic roles at Oxford, UCT, Wits and Stellenbosch, and holds degrees from Harvard, Oxford, MIT, London School of Economics, London Business School, and Wits. And Athol is currently the Chief Executive of the Institute for Social and Corporate Ethics. For those that would like to see more about what Athol does, I will share a little later in the chat function 2 URLs of 2 websites where you can also get some more information of Athol's doings. But that's enough from me. I now hand over to you, Athol. Really looking forward to your discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kobus. Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to have this discussion. It's often talking about ethics and whistleblowing is often quite a depressing subject. So I'm hoping this will be a lively discussion, not something that kind of leaves us all feeling quite down. I've spent a number of years studying and thinking about moral philosophy, in particular ethical actions and ethical behavior, not so much thinking about whistleblowing per se, but of course I got thrust into the real world of whistleblowing, both the act of blowing the whistle and dealing with the consequences of whistleblowing. And so more recently have been taking my ethical lens and applying it to whistleblowing. So this talk is not going to belabor all of those issues which I've talked about and many people have talked about, but to take a more analytical and critical look at the act of whistleblowing and how we treat whistleblowers and thinking about the ethical nature of whistleblowing. I'll leave some time at the end, obviously, for discussion. I think the discussion is often the most valuable part. So I'm happy at that point to take questions about my own experience or applying what I say in this talk to my experience so we can explore as much as you're interested in. But like I say, my talk per se is not going to focus on my experience. The topic and the material for today is quite a complex one. Both whistleblowing and ethics are complex issues. And the problem I find is that we seem to think they're quite simple. And when you think a complex issue is simple, that's often when we get decisions and actions that are dangerous, I think. And so I want to deal with some of the complexity today, and obviously I won't deal with all of the complexity. but with some of it. My goal really is to introduce you to some self-doubt about this issue. I want you, at the end of my talk, to feel less comfortable with these issues than before, because I want you to get out of that comfort zone of saying, this is all very simple. My mother raised me the right way, so obviously I know what ethics is, and I've got a view of whistleblowing. I want to just introduce some of the complexities so that when we do make decisions, we can act a bit more in a more informed way and make those decisions a bit more rigorously. So an unusual goal, because often speakers try to clarify things. I want to introduce a little complexity and hopefully give you some of the tools to deal with them. Okay, so let's just think about the prevailing views on whistleblowing. And there are two broad prevailing views. The one view says whistleblowing is a cowardly, unethical act because of the harm it does. So whistleblowing should be discouraged and whistleblowers should be punished, right? And so that's one prevailing view. The other prevailing view is that whistleblowing is a brave, ethical act because of the good it does. So whistleblowing should be encouraged and whistleblowers should be supported and protected and even rewarded. Quite an opposite view. And hopefully, as we go through this talk, now you might have a very clear view which way you lean towards, and hopefully as we go through this talk, you might begin to sort of question what your real position is. And my answer to these two prevailing views is, it depends. So I'm offering no blanket view of saying whistleblowing is right or wrong. It depends on the many circumstances, and we'll get to some of those circumstances. Okay, let's just think through an example. And this example is more about ethics than about whistleblowing, but it will help us just get our intuition and understand where we are. So imagine you're walking down the street and you see someone mugging an old lady. So someone's, let's say it's a man, he's punching the old lady, he's trying to grab her handbag. And you walking down, you see this. Now the question is, what do you do? And your options are fairly simple, right? Your option is you could intervene somehow and help the old lady. You could just walk on past, or you could do something else. You could call for help, perhaps. So let's just run our first of our two polls. I want to get from you what you would do. You're walking down the street, you see an old lady, you don't know the old lady, you don't know the mugger, but the mugger is punching the old lady and grabbing her handbag. So the poll is, option one is you will actually intervene and attack the mugger. Option two, you will call for help. And option three, you do nothing. Let's just get that poll going quickly. Let me see the results coming through. Let's get a few more votes. Quite a strong leaning towards call for help or attack the mugger. Maybe attack's a strong word, but it's sort of stop the mugger, let's say. Yep, still strong view that we will do something, and we're more likely to call for help, not get directly involved. And some people think, no, we should attack the mugger, stop the mugger. Because I guess the question of whether we attack the mugger or call for help is an issue of immediacy and urgency, right? I guess you might say, well, if we think the old lady's going to die, if we don't do something now, we might be more likely to intervene more directly. Otherwise, stay away from the mugger and call for help. So yeah, so that poll seems overwhelmingly, we'll do something. So no one is saying we do nothing. People are saying, well, we'll do something. Most likely we will call for help, or we will attack the mugger. Now, here's a question, and it's a rhetorical question. We can all just think about it. Why didn't we all want to attack the mugger? Right? Some said, no, intervene, but the majority of us said, we won't intervene, we'll find some other way of helping. Certainly no one said they'll do nothing, which is interesting, because our experience in the business world is that most people actually don't intervene. But we certainly, in this example, said we'll intervene, but we will stay away from the mugger. And the obvious answer is intervening with a mugger puts us in harm's way, right? There's a danger and a cost to intervening when something's going wrong. And I can fully understand that. That's an absolutely rational choice to make. You might say, well, it depends if the mugger's harmed or not. If you're a karate expert, you might say, well, I'm more likely to intervene. So a whole lot of considerations in thinking about whether you intervene with a mugger or not. But one primary concern I'm guessing you all would have is that if I intervene directly with a mugger, I might help the old lady, but I might get hurt, right? And I'm saying that's a rational concern to have because your life matters and your family's life matter, all the rest of it. So on the whole, we are saying we will do something, but we will not attack the mugger because of our concern about danger. So the situation, as we've just painted it, is one where we see a bad situation. We see something bad happening, and we can intervene. And if we intervene, some good will come to the victim, right? In this case, the old lady will benefit from our intervention. But some harm could come to the perpetrator, right? And by harm, I'm using harm quite loosely here, because if I do intervene, I do call for help, the perpetrator might end up going to prison. So if I did nothing, the old lady will be harmed, but the perpetrator will go free. If I do something, the old lady will be helped, but the perpetrator might end up going to prison. So there's pluses and minuses here, but the perpetrator definitely will suffer something. And of course, if I intervene, I could get hurt. And so what's important for me, just from this illustration, is to think about the three different parties. There are at least three parties we'll be thinking about intervening in a wrongdoing, and particularly around whistleblowing. There's the one party, the whistleblower, so the protagonist in our story. I'm walking down the street. There's someone who's committing some wrong. The perpetrator, in this case, was the mugger. And there's this third party, the beneficiary of our intervention, call it that. This would be the old lady. And so when asking ourselves the question, is whistleblowing ethical, we've got to consider it from all three of those parties in turn. And that becomes a very important part of our considerations. Okay. I said that this is quite a complex terrain to travel. So let me just give some simple definitions. These definitions would, I think moral philosophers would say, are too basic, but my focus here is about practicality as much as possible. So for me, there's two ideas around what whistleblowing is. If we're talking about the ethics of whistleblowing, let's decide what this whistleblowing thing is first. For me, whistleblowing is an intervention in a situation of wrongdoing that brings good to some, but potentially harm to others, including the whistleblower. And our challenge is justifying the harm to the parties who will get harmed and justifying why the victim should benefit. So it's an intervention in a situation of wrongdoing that brings good to some, but harm to others, including the whistleblower. Another way of thinking about whistleblowing is it's about revealing information that another party, often your employer, that another party would rather keep hidden. But this whistleblowing is done for some expected good rather than for self-interest or malice. So if I'm revealing confidential commercial information in order to harm my company, I don't consider that whistleblowing. Right? If my intent is to reveal sensitive information to harm my company, I don't consider that whistleblowing. If my intent is to reveal information, whether it's internally or publicly, because I think my company is doing something wrong, and by me revealing this information, it benefits society or benefits one of my colleagues or benefits some victim without my self-interest and without malice to my company, then we are talking about whistleblowing. And of course, there are variations around this point. Just to mention, there are three complexities in defining or thinking about whistleblowing, right? And you'll have different experiences around this. The one complexity is whether the whistleblowing happens internally only or whether you go public. So a lot of whistleblowing happens that we never hear about, never read about, because it happens internally. an employee sees some bad, she dials the whistleblower line, and it's dealt with internally. So that could be one form of whistleblowing. The other form could be the whistleblowing isn't dealt with internally, so you decide to go public, or it's so egregious, the wrongdoing, that you decide to go to the public protector or to the media or go outside with it. So one important thing when we're talking about whistleblowing, we need to define whether it's this internal whistleblowing and the public whistleblowing. And often I'm dealing with the public whistleblowing because this one's more complex. The second issue is whether the whistleblower is anonymous or identified. Again, if the whistleblower blows the whistle internally and he does so anonymously, often harm isn't so intense for that person because we don't know who they are, versus when the whistleblower identifies themselves. That's when we begin to have particular concerns around the whistleblower being harmed. The third complexity is whether the whistleblower was a participant or not in the harm, in the wrongdoing. And so we all know of cases where the whistleblower initially was part of the group that were committing this harm, and they then for some reason decided to blow the whistle on their former collaborators and do so for the good of society or the good of someone, but they were initially part of the problem. And that introduces more complexity. So in this talk, I'm going to be talking about a public whistleblower who is identified, so we know who he or she is, and they were not participants in the wrong. You can imagine as we introduce these factors into our overall thinking, it creates more complexity. Okay, so I've talked about what whistleblowing is. It's this intervention when you see something wrong, someone benefits from your whistleblowing, but someone might be damaged, including yourself. When I talk about the ethics of whistleblowing, what am I talking about? I mean, in very simple terms, when we talk about an ethical consideration, it's about right and wrong or good and bad. So we want to answer the question of, is it ethical? Is it right or wrong to blow the whistle? Is it good or bad to blow the whistle? And that's effectively the question we ask ourselves. Now, to answer that question, we've got to decide what right is and what wrong is and what good and what bad is. And this is where I find it quite problematic when we come into these situations and saying, well, my mother taught me very well, I know right from wrong. Because we go back to our mugger situation, most of us said we wouldn't help the old lady. Now, I'm pretty sure, I don't know, I was raised to say, if you see someone in distress, you should try and help. Most of us sort of said, we won't help, we'll call for help, but who knows when help might come and what form help might come in. My only point here is that just our ethics at home is often challenged when we go into the workplace, because the workplace is a very different environment. There are different complexities there. It's other people's money, it's other people's lives. It's not just my own. And so it's important for us to be clear about how we can decide what is right and wrong in our situation. Okay, so for me, when you talk about being ethical, or whether something's ethical or not, we're talking about a choice, right? I either speak up, I don't speak up. It's a choice about the actions we take or don't take. So we can either do something that's harmful or not do something, and still it could be harmful. And I'll come back to that. We've got to think about the different roles we play. So yes, none of us are the mugger. I think when we all say we're ethical people, we're saying, I never go out and mug people. And I think that's right. But what about the bystander? What about us walking past and seeing these bad things in our society? We see the poverty in our society. We see the gender-based violence in our society. And we tend to have the view that says, well, I'm silent. I wasn't involved and I'm staying out of it. But staying out of something when you've observed it does not let you off the ethical hook. It might let you off the legal hook in some cases, but ethically you are still liable for something, and I'll come to that. Okay, so we've laid some of the groundwork. We've talked about what whistleblowing is, what ethics is. I want to make sure that I avoid any jargon, and so we'll try and avoid any of the ethical theories. A last point in terms of groundwork is just this issue of law versus ethics. As a starting point, we often have an ethical view that says, well, I'm ethical if I'm obeying the law. Or if I'm part of a profession like a lawyer or an accountant or an auditor, you'll say I'm ethical if I'm obeying the code of ethics or the code of practice of my profession. I think that's the minimum requirement. But I think ethics is far more demanding than the law. is far more demanding than our codes of practice. And so there might be things that might be legal that are unethical. Think of apartheid, right? Under apartheid, a lot of the racism was legal, so within the law, but they were unethical. So merely obeying the law doesn't always mean we are acting ethically. And so, like I say, ethics has a higher hurdle to clear than often the law. Okay, so let me just get down to this issue then of whistleblowing particularly. We talked about the three parties. There's the whistleblower, so the person who blows the whistle. There's the whistleblowee, I don't know if we can use that term, but it's typically the company or the perpetrator. It's the party who the whistleblower deems to have acted wrongly, or the party who wants to keep the information hidden. That's our second party. And our third party is the party that is expected to benefit from your intervention, expected to benefit from your whistleblowing. So this could be society just more generally, or it could be the old lady, the victim, or it could be a colleague. Someone is going to benefit from you blowing the whistle. Otherwise, I think just blowing the whistle without there being any benefit to anyone, is a valid approach, but less compelling often. Okay, and so how does this situation of the whistleblowing come about? Well, the whistleblower believes that he or she has observed some wrongdoing. It could be the company acting dishonestly, illegally, harmfully, offensively, often sexual harassment type things. So someone in my company or the company itself at the highest level has acted wrongly. I've observed it. Right? And observe is a general word. I've seen, heard, read documents, but I know about wrongdoing that's happened. So that's how this situation starts. Obviously, this other party is the company, and they must have done something wrong. The third party here, the beneficiary, we must believe that there's a case for whistleblowing if they have been harmed. They've suffered something because of the company's wrongdoing. So either they've suffered something, and so blowing the whistle will help repair, or they've got something to benefit, justifiably benefit if I blow the whistle. So these three parties again, I seen something wrong, so I want to blow the whistle. The company has done something wrong, and there's someone who's going to benefit from me blowing this whistle. Let's think about the impacts of these three parties of blowing the whistle, because this becomes the nub of the issue of whether we decide it is ethical or not, or how we determine whether it is something we want to do as ethical persons or not. So what's the impact on the whistleblower of blowing the whistle, right? What's the impact of me walking down the street and intervening, attacking the mugger? Often the case with the whistleblower is that the whistleblower suffers. The whistleblower would suffer. Let's think about it in the context of I'm at a company, I'm an employee. The whistleblower often suffers reaction from his colleagues or from her employer. The reaction could be in terms of relationships. So relationships are now soured. You can imagine after I blew the whistle at Bain, I was shunned. My cell phone was cut off. My laptop was disabled. Staff stopped communicating with me. These were old friends who I've known for over 20 years, just completely cut me off, wouldn't speak to me. So relationships get broken and get damaged. Your promotion prospects are impacted. Your bonus is potentially impacted. Your reputation in the company and in the industry is potentially impacted. This is all you as the whistleblower, the person who's done the good thing. You might even lose your job. So in many cases, whistleblowers are pushed out of the company. There are trumped up charges, there's disciplinary action, or they resign. And when they do resign, they then get out into a market, which, certainly to my surprise, they're not welcomed. So there's no real prospects for someone in the market, largely because people tend to hold that first view that I described of the prevailing view. There's a general view that says whistleblowers are troublemakers, they're snitches, they act cowardly. And so I don't want these troublemakers, these snitches in my business. And so that's often the experience of whistleblowers. So what's the impact on our first party, the whistleblower? Often very negative. And we can talk about whether that's right or wrong and how we fix it if we think it's wrong. The second party, the company, actually suffers as well, right? So the company, when someone's blowing the whistle on a company, there's massive internal chaos. When they've blown this whistle, they now say the CEO is having an affair with someone, or the commercial director has been involved in corruption. It causes massive internal chaos. There's an investigation that follows, there's media coverage, lawyers are involved, there's fear amongst staff, are we going to lose our jobs? Some people are fired, there's financial loss because the costs go up, we lose clients, we lose revenue. So while the whistleblower is harmed, the company is also harmed. And again, we've got to ask ourselves, is it justified ethically for the whistleblower to be harmed? Is it justified ethically for the company to be harmed if they've done wrong? And then the third impact is, again, on our beneficiaries. So again, if I've blown the whistle on my company for having done something wrong, presumably someone benefits, whether it's society or someone else. And in my case, for example, I blew the whistle on my suspicions and the evidence I had based on the evidence I had, I testified and blew the whistle on Bain's involvement with parties involved in state capture. So who benefited from that? Well, I think our society benefited from that in that we were closer to the truth, we were closer to justice because of this information being revealed and this hard evidence being revealed. Okay, so now we've seen the impacts of blowing the whistle. And a lot of this is quite intuitive. The question then, the key ethical question then is, are these impacts ethical? Can we offer ethical justification for these impacts? Because when we are asking, is it ethical to blow the whistle? What we in effect are asking is it right or good for an employee to reveal information about a company, the company's wrongdoing, information the company might want to have kept confidential? Is it right or wrong for the employee to reveal this information, but revealing this information is expected to benefit society, right? And that's part of our ethical difficulty is these multiple parties to consider. So why is this complicated? I mentioned some of this already, but one view is, right, so here's the view from the company standpoint, or people who say whistleblowing is wrong. The view is that an employee has an obligation to do what is right for the company. An employee has an obligation to act in the company's interest. There's a relationship between the employee and the employer. And so blowing the whistle violates this relationship. When an employee is expected to act in the best interest of the company, if you check a lot of your employment contracts or the terms of your employment, it will say you are meant to act in the best interest of the company at all times. And so blowing the whistle, you're actually causing harm to the company. And so this might be seen as wrong. So let me run my second poll at this point, just make sure you guys are awake and active in this. What do you think around blowing the whistle in terms of impact on the company? So your option one would say violating the relationship and harming your company is wrong, and therefore blowing the whistle is unethical. That would be option one. Option two would be, if a company did wrong, it deserves some sanction. It deserves to be punished, and therefore blowing the whistle is ethical. Let's run that poll and see what you guys think. Okay, give it a few more minutes. So far, majority are saying if the company did wrong, it deserves sanction and therefore blowing the whistle is ethical. 100% of people are saying that. No one agrees with the statement that violating the relationship and harming the company is wrong. It's interesting. I've never seen it that strong a dichotomy before, and I guess it depends on the sample of attendees. Maybe you all are very interested in ethics, and you are strong ethical people, so you've taken this view. Normally, I see some people hold fast to saying, no, this whistleblowing is wrong if it harms the company. So good. It seems overwhelmingly that we are saying that if the company did wrong, and of course that has to be proven, but if the company did wrong to an employee, to society, it's poured poison in the rivers, it's involved in state capture, it's involved in corruption, it's price fixing. If the company's done wrong, then it is ethical to blow the whistle on them because they've done harm. So great. So that's quite a strong view coming through there. And so our first question was, the first part of our question on whether it is ethical to blow the whistle, we could say it is ethical to blow the whistle on a company, even if it does harm to the company, when it is ethical when they have done something wrong and harmful, right? So the company doing something wrong and harmful justifies the harm that might come to them from me blowing the whistle. And of course, there's going to be an issue of degrees here. So there's a lot of nuances around that, but just at sort of very high level principle, it says, if the company has done something wrong and my blowing the whistle reveals this, and so harm comes to the company, I'll be ethically justified doing so. Okay, what about self-sacrifice? What about the fact that when I blow the whistle, I know harm comes to me, harm comes to my family, and so we need to have an ethical view on whether that is justified. And I'm not going to run a poll on that one, but that one becomes often more complex, right? Because now it's very personal. Am I willing to give up my income? Am I willing to give up my reputation in order to do this good for society? So often when I deal with this and people say, but you've got this relationship and this obligation to your company, I say, remember, there are three parties here. So I agree I've got an obligation to my company, but I've also got an obligation to myself, and I've got an obligation to society. And in thinking about the right thing to do, I've got to consider all three of those parties. What is right and good for all three of those parties? And then there's no formula in weighing that up, but that's when we rely on our own conviction about whether we then blow the whistle or not. So let's take another view of this idea of whether it's ethical or not to blow the whistle. There's a view that I want to put forward that says, actually, you might not have a choice. If you've seen something wrong, so far I've been saying you've got to weigh these things up, right? So far I've been saying, well, depends on whether the company's done wrong, or how much wrong they've done, depends on harm to you, depends on the good that might come of it. There's some sort of ethical mathematics you can do to decide the right thing to do. Let me just complicate that a bit by saying, but maybe we don't have an ethical choice, right? And I want to introduce this idea of the different roles one can play in unethical behavior. So in the mugger example, it's absolutely clear that you are not the perpetrator. You are not the mugger, right? And so no one will be accusing you of unethical behavior, of mugging an old lady. But there are other roles you could have played, right? Imagine you were actually the one who drove the mugger to that street and dropped him off and said, hey, there's an old lady, go for it, right? In this case, you'd have known the mugger's intent, even though you yourself did not mug the old lady. But you are aware of his intent and participated in the scheme to bring about this harm. And so we can justifiably say that you were complicit, you were a collaborator in the harm. You did not mug anyone, but you were a collaborator in that harm. And so that becomes a consideration for us in our work, in thinking, well, something wrong happened. I wasn't at that meeting, so my hands are clean. And I would say, really? Right? Were you in some way involved in the scheme, even though you weren't at that final meeting? So one other role to perpetrator we could play is that of being a collaborator or complicit. Another way, of course, is we could be a bystander. So in the case of the mugger, I could just walk past and say, not my business, I didn't cause this, right? And often again, we say, I didn't cause it, not my business, therefore I'm neutral. Well, actually, you're not neutral. And I don't mean these things in the way we debate things on Facebook, which is often very superficial. Harm can come to someone by me doing something or me allowing something to happen, right? So I could argue that as that mugger approaches the old lady, at that point, you could have intervened. You could have stopped the mugger, and so stop the harm to the old lady. By doing nothing, by just standing by, you've allowed this harm to come to the old lady. And it's a very ethical, complicated idea, I understand that. But we could argue that by just standing by and doing nothing, you actually allowed some of the harm to come to the old lady. So you bear some responsibility, not as much as the perpetrator, but you bear some responsibility. So just standing by doing nothing does not let you off the ethical hook. So second way you can be involved other than a perpetrator is as a bystander. And the third way you could potentially be involved other than a perpetrator is to be a beneficiary of this wrongdoing. So again, go back to your work situation. You say, I wasn't at this meeting where this corrupt deal was done. I wasn't involved. I wasn't complicit. I didn't collaborate. I wasn't a bystander, because a bystander in a meeting would be someone who sat there and didn't say anything. So I wasn't involved at all. But at the end of the year, your bonus was partly paid for by the deal, this corrupt deal that was done. And so in an indirect way or direct way, depending, you are a beneficiary of the harm that was done. So just to summarize those three, we are acting unethically, or we have an obligation to intervene when we are not perpetrators, but we could be complicit, we could be bystanders, or we could be beneficiaries. And I argue ethically that compels us to do something. And that's a complex idea and messy idea, which again we can talk about in question and answer. Okay, as I draw to a close, I think the key thing in thinking about whether we think whistleblowing or any intervention is ethical, and your particular case, is to go through some of the steps I went through in this simple analysis. One is to identify the parties first. And often that can be hard, right? But identify the parties, identify the impacts on each of these parties, determine the ethical justification for those parties. So for example, if we're saying, well, if I blow the whistle, some people in my company are going to lose jobs, and that's a regrettable outcome, but you still think it's justifiable because of the good that's going to come from blowing the whistle, then you can justify that. So determine the ethical justification, but also consider your participation, your role in the wrongdoing, and determine whether what obligation you therefore have to blow the whistle because of your role. So I've said a mouthful. Let me just conclude with a few ideas, and then we can open it for questions and comments. 5 points. We all bear, living in a society, we bear a whole range of ethical responsibilities. I've got a responsibility to myself. I've got a responsibility to my family. I've got a responsibility to my children, my community, my society, my country. I've got a responsibility to all of humanity in some way. I've got a responsibility to all life in some way. We have all these different responsibilities. And how we prioritize those responsibilities determines the actions we take and how we make our decisions. And that often isn't very explicit in our minds. And so I often cite the example, I was raised to say, don't lie. And so that's very clear in my mind, I mustn't lie. But when I'm a salesman and I go and sell to a customer, and I know my competitor's got a better product than mine, and I don't tell my customer about the competitor's better product, because which salesman does that, right? I must always tell the customer my product is best. Is that not a form of lying? I'm withholding information that will be very relevant to this customer. And so this idea, as I mentioned in the beginning, of taking my home ethics, it applies in business, but it often is very difficult to apply it in business, because this salesman would be seen as an astute businessman, right? Oh, he's street smart, we say, because he's able to kind of, move things around and dodge and duck. This is often unethical behavior and becomes very complicated for us. Yet we need the sale to earn our bonus. And so it brings me to my second point of conclusion, that acting ethically is very rarely costless. If I really want to be an ethical person in business, there are times when it's going to cost me something. It's going to cost me my job. It's going to cost me relationships. It's going to cost me my bonus. Just like the person walking down the street and seeing a mugger. If I'm going to intervene, it's going to cost me something. It might just be a punch in the face or something worse. But acting ethically is really costless. And so again, when we say, let's encourage everyone to be ethical, we've got to be very careful that we are not encouraging people to put themselves in harm's way. Few of us are ever perpetrators, as I said, but many of us, in fact, most of us, are many times are bystanders, collaborators, or beneficiaries. And so we've definitely got to consider that when deciding whether we should blow the whistle or not. I think it's right and important for companies to hold their information confidential. It's important. But when the company does something wrong, as your intuition showed, we are justified in doing something that might cause harm to that company. And just lastly, whistleblowers tend to be driven by the good in society. That's often, if you ask any whistleblower why they spoke up, it was driven by some higher purpose, some sense of commitment to other people, to broader society. And they're willing to bear this cost that is often they're burdened with. And so I think as a society, we should find ways to minimize the cost to whistleblowers, because that will encourage more people to blow the whistle. And also, I think as a society, we are doing the right thing by whistleblowers to minimize that burden they bear for acting in our interest. So let me leave it there. I've raced through a number of ideas, but hopefully it's given you some sense of discomfort and some things you want to test. I'll hand it back to Kobus to guide us through the Q&A.
Sure.
Over to you, Kobus.
Athol, I'm actually, thank you. Athol, thank you so much. My mind is racing in so many directions at the moment. In taking us through this ethical view on whistleblowers, I, for one, you spoke about the comfort zone. I've really been pushed out of it, and bringing us to a state of deep self-reflection. And thinking about the prevailing view of the cowardly act versus the brave act. And, you made reference to, depending on the circumstances, which I kind of view very, very close to, practical wisdom, which is very context dependent, it's pragmatic in its approach, but ultimately in pursuit of the common good. So it's a very, very complex matter, and I'm asking myself the question, how would, and the analogy of the mugger, that's one thing, and it really helped me and all of us this morning just to hold up the mirror as well, to bring it closer to home to me. We tend to kind of look at these things out there, and an awesome individual like yourself, I salute you, Athol, for what you've done, that type of thing. But when I bring it closer to home, wow, yeah. That's to me, what might choice be? So, you spoke about the impact around the ethical justification. Is it right, wrong, and will it benefit society? And then a very important thing you said is maybe we don't have an ethical choice. And it made me think of Plato's words, who said, your silence gives consent. And it kind of shake one's in your own foundation. Because ultimately, it's going to cost me. So, that's phenomenal. Now, I see we've got a couple of questions there. Athol, and let's run with the first one there from I don't know, Prof. or Doctor or Admiral or General Nicholson. What is the use of whistleblowing or making a protected disclosure when no one has the mandate to investigate such disclosure?
I'm struggling with that, the second part, because you're saying no one has the mandate. I mean, I think, we've got the Hawks, we've got the NPA, we've got a criminal justice system who should be investigating criminal activity. And so if you've blown the whistle and revealed legitimate information, I think there are parties who should be investigating. Whether they have the will to do so or whether they have the capacity or the competence is a separate issue. But I think there are parties who should be investigating it.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Athol. Next one here from Liesel. Liesel, good to see you here as well. If the company did something wrong and I blow the whistle, it could impact on the livelihoods of the employees of the company. You explain that one must be able to justify one's decision in this regard. And how does one justify that many people might lose their jobs if I speak up?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. That's a common concern. It was a concern I had at Bain as well, of the impact my speaking up was going to have on my colleagues. So let's work through that. I think the question is wrongly stated. And this is not a comment on Liesel. This is a comment because this is how I ask the question as well, and how we typically see the question. We place the burden of those jobs on the whistleblower, whereas I think the burden of those jobs should be placed on the company who did something wrong. Right? I am not doing anything wrong by blowing the whistle. But what has the company done? The company has done something wrong, something illegal, let's say, and by virtue of the illegal act, the company has put jobs at risk. All I'm doing is opening the door so that we all can see what the company has done. I am not putting those jobs at risk, right? And I think that's important. We're going to say, who has done something wrong? And the wrongdoer here is the company, and therefore they put those jobs at risk. So the moment I dealt with that in my mind, I said, actually, I'm not putting anyone's job at risk. The company, by continuing to do wrong or to hide their wrongdoing, they are putting jobs at risk.
That is a very wise answer, Athol. Thank you. Another question there from Kali. If whistleblowing is costless, what can be done to encourage people to do the right thing by whistleblowing wrongdoing?
So we get to the state where whistleblowing is costless. I think we will see a lot more whistleblowing, right? If I live in a world where if I see wrong and I speak up and I blow the whistle on that wrongdoing and nothing happens to me, nothing bad happens to me, I'm more likely to do it. I think we need less encouragement then. I still think we don't get perfect whistleblowing because there are still going to be unethical people around there who will just not want to do the right thing. But I think today the silence around wrongdoing is driven by two factors. One is fear, and secondly, just people who don't want to do the right thing. It's hard to convince the second guy. But when whistleblowing is costless, I think the first guy speaks up. And so we make major progress.
Yeah, so maybe quite related to that is the question on how can society give back to whistleblowers?
Yeah, my sense, Kobus, is what whistleblowers need, and this is born out of my experience and then subsequently things I've read about. Whistleblowers actually need quite simple things, right? At the outset, you need legal support. It's more support you need. Right, so you need legal support, you need some medical support, because often whistleblowers suffer particularly mental health challenges. So you need medical support, legal support, and then depending on the circumstances, even financial support, right? Because now they've lost their job. But if we can create an agency, and I've written about it, called it a whistleblower support agency, just like we've got agencies for most social ills in our society. If child's being abused, there's Childline. If a woman's being abused, there are places she can go to. So I'm sort of imagining a number you can call, right? So either I'm thinking of blowing the whistle or blowing the whistle, I dial this number and I get this support. People tell me about my risks, they tell me about my rights, and then offer the support. So it seems to me a very simple solution. I think one company in South Africa can set this up, right? And what it needs is this will and this vision to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Athol, there's also a view here that the problem that we've seen, especially with regards to the state capture, that perpetrators do not get punished, if we can use that expression, which creates apathy. So the question then comes up is, why then should people speak up?
Yeah, and I think that's an important question. And a way to think about it is, again, my three parties, right? And my ethical mathematics. I blow the whistle. Yes, I incur costs, the company might incur costs, but I do so because I believe there's going to be some good to society, right? Now that good to society requires investigations and prosecutions, particularly around state capture. So in South Africa right now, in terms of state capture, you could argue, actually blowing the whistle brings no good to society because no one's ever prosecuted. And so I think implicit in that person's question is that sort of ethical mathematics. I do think our country in many ways is an anomaly because in other societies, action is far more urgent around some of these allegations. So I still think I'd want to live in a society where we can blow the whistle and there is action taken against perpetrators. I think the issues with the Zondo Commission is that the Zondo Commission is collecting information, but we haven't seen prosecutions yet. I live in hope that that's going to happen at some point soon.
Yeah. All right. Brian made the opinion here that he speaks about another nuance, that some reports concern unlawful, unethical, and inappropriate activities which the organization itself is guilty. Most reports, he says, however, actually concern activities done within the company which harm the company.
Yes.
What would your view be on that, Athol?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that was my distinction up front around some of the complexities. If you recall, I said sometimes the whistleblower is involved or not involved. The whistleblower is anonymous or it's public, or the whistleblower is just internal or public. And I think by far the majority of whistleblowing happens, it's internal, it's anonymous, and we never get to hear about it. And so I think the considerations are exactly the same. In this case, if I see my colleague stealing pencils, and I think that's wrong, I blow the whistle for the good of my company. I blow the whistle for the good of our shareholders. And so that's the person who's going to benefit from me blowing the whistle on my colleague. If I've seen sexual harassment, my colleague being treated unfairly, when I blow the whistle, she's going to be the beneficiary of me blowing the whistle. So the considerations are still there.
Yeah. Okay. Carly's got another view here. If whistleblowing is about cost-benefit analysis, doesn't that take away the basic tenets of ethics? In other words, to do the right thing.
I think you recall my sort of complication, my curveball I threw at the end of my presentation, which said maybe we haven't got a choice, right? So the cost-benefit analysis approach, which I painted up front to my presentation, definitely was a cost-benefit, and I called it ethical mathematics. But I don't think cost-benefit is the only way to make this decision. And in fact, I think we've got ethical obligations that supersede that. So I think it's useful to have the cost-benefit considerations. Often it'll help you justify your decision. But ultimately, I believe we've got ethical responsibilities that supersede that. So great question, but I completely agree. We've got responsibilities above this cost-benefit.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. Devotion here got two. The one question, this is, would you whistleblow again, Athol? That's the first question. Wow, that's a tough one. But he follows it up with, do you think the PDA should be amended to remove internal whistleblowing hotlines to be established due to the high number of retaliation?
This is Devisham. I know Devisham. Would I blow the whistle again? I'm going to give a very cowardly answer and say it depends on the circumstance. I have been so badly burned by what I've done And that hasn't made me cynical, but that has made me more realistic in terms of what the reality is in our country. Encouraging someone to blow the whistle today is tantamount to encouraging them to put themselves in harm's way. Ethically, I think that's wrong. So it's not as easy to say, oh, go blow the whistle because it's the hero, right? You're the hero of blowing the whistle. Well, you're not a hero in South Africa. In fact, you can be punished pretty badly. So I'm very circumspect about encouraging people to be whistleblowers. I often encourage them to consider the risks involved. So for me, I want to consider that very carefully before just saying absolutely yes. I'm glad I did. I was glad to be able to serve my country in that way, but it does depend. The second issue around amending the PDA, I mean, the PDA needs to be amended for a number of reasons. I do think that I'm a big fan of transparency and having things disclosed, and then it is making our ethical decisions based on full information. So I agree with the sentiment there that I'd want those whistleblower reports in every company to be public, but particularly the ones that have got some credibility. So there needs to be some filter that says this is a real issue, and then someone we as society can make a judgment. I'll tell you where this is particularly relevant, Cobus, is in this idea of ethical investing, right? I had a lot of work with asset managers, and they talk about ethical investing. And they judge an ethical investment based often purely on the product the company produces. So we've said there are ethical products, there are unethical products. Unethical product is ammunition on guns, unethical product is alcohol, but ethical product is bread, right? But yet, if I'm now going to find out that this bread company has got massive sexual harassment issues, massive corruption issues, how can I possibly say investing in the bread business is an ethical investment? So I'm encouraging the investment community, at least, to make the assessment based on the entire value chain and what's happening inside the company. And so what Devisham's proposing, I think, would help doing that.
Okay. Thank you so much. Russell asks the question, are there cultural factors that prevail in our South African society that hinders more disclosures of whistleblowing, in your view?
Could you repeat that, Cobus?
So that Russell asked, are there cultural factors that prevail in our South African society that hinders more disclosures of whistleblowing?
Wow, I haven't thought about that, to be honest. I haven't thought about that. Yeah, to be honest, Russell, I'm sorry, I just haven't thought about that. And that might require some empirical understanding of different cultures, because that suggests some cultures are more prone to being honest than others. And I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with you. It would require a very broad empirical research, I believe. My first submission to that would be, and I might be regarded as generalizing, but inherently irrelevant of culture. As you've noted at one stage, what our upbringing is that is for, let's call it, to be good, to be good people, not to steal, not to lie, not to lie, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
Although there's eventually now journeys, many other influences that play a role, but I think at the building block of society, the home, where things start. I think all cultures are, good. There is good in there. So yeah, that's just a view. Then we have one here from another last question here. There's another one coming up. Are there any statutory bodies or an act holding organizations accountable for unethical behavior, or organizations punish employees for unethical behavior, yet when employees blow the whistle as an ethical practice, they are not protected? There is a whole lot of injustice happening. Your view, Athol?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. I don't, if we draw this distinction between ethical and illegal, right? So saying there are some activities that might be legal that are unethical. Because I think there are bodies holding companies accountable for illegal activity. It's our police and it's our investigative authorities, right? I mean, if you're lying, presumably the auditors catch it and the commercial investigation units of the Hawks come and grab you. So if it's pure illegal activity, I think there are bodies watching our companies. It's more around that unethical stuff. And our first port of call would be the board, especially if it's a public company. You know, the board should be catching this.
Yeah.
But I think often boards are not catching it. I think boards are often, if you ask a board member in whose interest do you act, again, it comes to my ethical mathematics, they'll say in the interest of the company, and I'll say, well, what about society? And they often would say society isn't a major factor here. You know, Cobus, I recently interviewed for a board, to be a board member for a listed company. And when I emphasized my focus on society, the chairman asked me if I was socialist in a very derogatory way, right? So this idea of a board member caring about society is frowned upon. And so I agree with the sentiment there that says, yes, companies are hard on employees for doing wrong, but they themselves get away with a whole lot. I agree. I'll even add to that. Most whistleblower programs assume that bad things happen low down in the organization, right? Whereas in most cases, the really, really bad things happen at the executive level in the company, at the board level. And I spoke recently to an executive and I said to him, how many times has your whistleblower program highlighted, senior managers? He said, never, right? And so these whistleblower programs internally are often a sham because they're assuming the bad people are in the factory, on the factory floor, not in the C-suite.
Indeed. Right, Athol, we're going to do one more question. We've run out of time. There's one from Devusham again. Should be taken to constitutional court for infringement of whistleblowers' constitutional right and the poor implementation of PDA. Another toughie there for you, Athol.
Yeah, she's pushing my knowledge here. I'm not a constitutional law person. Sorry there, Devusham. I think it's something. There is an issue around whistleblowers being persecuted and our rights being contravened. Absolutely.
You're right. Well, I'm going to squeeze in the last quick one here. In the global trends of whistleblowing, Athol, how well is South Africa doing? What would your view be on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I again haven't conducted extensive research on this, and I'll tell you what I've observed. I've seen, I can compare us to Germany, the UK, and the US, just because I've seen a lot of writing about that. And it seems certainly that they have far more sophisticated ways of dealing with this. We see in those countries support agencies for whistleblowers. We see in those countries very strong legal support and action. And I mean, in the US, almost daily they report whistleblowers being paid rewards. And that's another question around whether whistleblowers should be compensated for the harm they suffered or paid rewards. But whistleblowers are actively paid rewards for blowing the whistle. So I do think, I was shocked, completely stunned that there was no legal support for whistleblowers, and there is no legal support for whistleblowers, or very little, in South Africa. And other countries seem to have, certainly those three I mentioned, far more advanced ways of dealing with it.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Athol, wow. I think we could go on for the entire day. It's so inspiring in the one end, but also so challenging at a personal level. And so from me, the team, all our visitors to our virtual auditorium, our deepest appreciation and thanks to you sharing your insights and your wisdom with us. We wish you all the best, and thank you again. And we are really honored to have had you here on our Tomorrow is Beautiful webinar. So with that, colleagues, wishing you well, and let's part with the words of Tomorrow is Beautiful. Thank you so much.